The Financial Survival Network, helping you survive and thrive in the new economy. Go to CarrieLutz.com and sign up for 30 free micro trainings on financial survival.
1490 WGCH. This is Carrie Lutz. You're listening to the Financial Survival Network. If you're wondering what's going on with the stock market, oil and gas, gold and silver, here's somebody who has got his hand on the pulse and has been right a lot more than he's been wrong. Peter Grandich, how are you?
Oh, thank you very much, and a pleasure to be on with your show.
Hey, it's great to have you, and I've been reading your updates. You're starting to be a little nervous about the levels the market's hitting, aren't you?
Well, yes, I am certainly not a roaring bull, but throughout 2011, I never shorted the market despite a lot of people's belief it should be, and I even went long towards the end of the year. And I started the new year believing that the least resistance is up, and even in today's commentary to my readers, I felt it continue going up. But I don't think it's the start of a new mega bull market by any means. I really feel the United States is in kind of like an eye of a storm. We've had the first wave of a hurricane, and the back end, which is always worse, is going to come. And so I don't want to be very long equities, but I think it's also at the same time has been a poor choice, and so far we've been right to be short the market.
Right. So what influence do you think manipulation by the Fed, the president's working group, and all of those hedge funds, do you think that they're just artificially keeping the market up, or do you think there's some fundamental strength here?
Well, I've written for a long time, even in my book, I noted that I have called it, to my at least, comedy. Some people may not find it funny, but I have always termed that there's a group on Wall Street that I've coined the "Don't Worry, Be Happy" crowd, and it's mostly the financial professional community. That doesn't mean individuals that within that community aren't sincere and honest and working, but by and large, the bias in the industry is that. It's usually to be long. Stocks and/or bonds are always a buy. It's just like I always said, if you tossed one of those folks off the Empire State Building all the way down, they would say the same thing. So far, so good. And the bottom line is that tilt plus still the tremendous amount of ease. Let's not forget that interest rates are still very low. A lot of money has been created. And, you know, most of the mainstream media plays into that hands because they make their livings off of a happy financial industry. So I think that's at the moment why they seem to be controlling the cards, while the underpinnings are getting worse. The things that longer term are going to make things worse. And to be blunt, the single biggest concern I have, and I think eventually it engulfs all the markets, some will benefit, others won't, and that is the United States has simply taken on too much debt. And if you can get past all the hoopla and all some scare tactics from the negatives and the "Don't Worry, Be Happy" crowd will say, don't worry about it. The fact is this: we have so much debt that the United States can't produce enough cash flow to service the interest rate, let alone pay down principal. And I just believe that's a fact of life. And if one accepts that, then the inevitable is only three things. The debt is reneged on, it's renegotiated, or it's monetized. And I think eventually it's all three. So short to intermediate term, they can kick the can once, maybe twice further down the road. But eventually even the can becomes so heavy that the "Don't Worry, Be Happy" crowd can't lift it. And that's the day of reckoning that eventually hits our shores.
So it's not a matter of if, it's really a matter of when.
Yeah, in my book, you know, you can, you know, the only thing you can always say is you never can guarantee death and taxes. But, you know, I'm age 55. I hope to live another 20, maybe 30 years. And I think long before that time frame is up, we will have gone through something far worse than even Europe is going through now. And it's not something that's going to be fixed in 3 months or 3 years. And the problem there also is the people that we will eventually hope to fix it are the very people that led us to where we are, and that's the political process in Washington. It's not a matter of what party or parties. It's the whole process. The process is broken. We're just seeing too much big government. The bigger government comes, the more voices those people within the government have to keep the game going. and soon there's going to be more government workers than private workers. And once we hit that level, then the game is over, because we'll never get the reform that the country needs. So it's a very scary situation. I have friends, I live in a 55 and over community, especially with people much older than me, and they just say sometimes to me, Peter, please shut up. I don't want to hear it anymore. I mean, they believe it, but they don't want to hear it. And so it doesn't make for a soothed palate, but it is what I believe inevitably is coming down the road.
Yeah, no doubt. It's kind of like when you're talking about expecting the same people who caused the problem to solve it. It's like expecting an arsonist who lights fire to your house, then come and put the fire out, and just doesn't happen that way. And really what you're describing is there's no political will to really reform the system and to set the country back on its path. So we're going to have to hit some type of disaster which forces reform upon us, correct?
Yeah, and there probably are people that head to Washington hoping to do the right thing, but inevitably the game is so stacked against them they can't, or they conform to the ways. And you're right in terms of that. And realistically, I think history will show, and we may not be around when the historians finally write that, but I think history will show that it would have been better in the last crisis in 2008 to let everything unwind then. There was a small group, but a very vocal group, who felt it was better than to let everything unwind, go in default, maybe even go through a deep depression, but it would have allowed us to start working towards a longer-term solution. And instead, the only thing that's really changed, in my book anyway, from 2008 to 2012, was a Band-Aid approach. And that Band-Aid was very expensive. We created trillions of more dollars of debt. We've seen more political infighting and separation among parties. There's less goodwill in Washington. I just saw a poll yesterday, I believe, in the news, where less than 8% of Americans have confidence in Congress. I mean that epitomizes the situation. So I really think when the day comes, and like you said earlier, it's not if but when, it's actually going to be far worse now than it would have been just a few years ago.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder what that 8% is smoking, because how could any reasonable person have any confidence in this band of thieves that call Washington their place of employment? It's really disheartening, because it's like any doctor will tell you, if you don't get to the root of the disease, there's no possibility of curing it, because if you're treating pneumonia and the guy's got lung cancer, his odds might not be very good, but treating the symptom of pneumonia isn't going to do any good in the long run for this guy.
Yeah, and just to close on maybe the political side of it, is the shame of it is, and again, here I catch some flack from some people because they believe he's out there, but the only person who's made a very credible argument with facts and understands it, and clearly does from decades of being in the trenches and understand the financial end, is Ron Paul.
Absolutely.
And so I've had friends tell me, well, but he's crazy about foreign policy. I said, listen, if we don't fix the root of the financial problem in the U.S., all those other things ain't going to matter, because there's going to be no money or anything to do any of those things. And unfortunately, I have not seen any of the other Republican frontrunners, or for that matter, all the people who've declared, and of course the current president, clearly, in my opinion, has not demonstrated an understanding and ability to the root causes of where we're at. And so all we've done in the last 4 years is, underneath the carpet, things have gotten a lot worse. It may look better than in the depths of the 2008 crisis, but everything that led to that crisis, all the factors are as bad, if not worse now. So it's just a matter before it raises its ugly head again. It's only a matter of when. Yeah,
like you say, we've been in the eye, and it's so great that you bring up Ron Paul, because he's so easy to marginalize. His voice is a little funny. He's from Texas, and his ideas are so outside the conventional wisdom, the norm, and the foreign policy just really makes him an easy target. But it all comes down to the Federal Reserve. It all comes down to the monetary system. The global financial system is pegged to that monetary system till we get back to something where they can't print up the money and take on unlimited debt as a result of it, nothing is going to change, like you said.
And, you know, if I may be so bold to place another foundation of mine, and, you know, I talked earlier about the financial system, and I talked about the financial arena. Think about this. In 2006 and 7 and part of 8, effectively what happened on Wall Street was it was as if the major car companies sold tens of billions of dollars worth of cars all around the world, knowing those cars were going to crash. And then they bought life insurance on the drivers who they knew were going to die when those cars crashed. That's what the financial world did in the mortgage scam of 2006, 7, and 8, where we all know now hundreds of billions of dollars, not only here in the U.S., but around the world, was sold by the so-called financial experts on Wall Street, knowing full well that not only were they not going to work, but they actually made bets against it. And to this date, to my knowledge, no one of any significance has gone to jail for it. Tens of billions of dollars of fines have been paid, but when hundreds of billions of dollars were made, I think anybody would pay tens of billions of fines if you're making hundreds of billions of dollars. And so what concerns me about that and the laxity of both not only the regulatory community, but investors themselves, that they're still willingly participating in a game, the financial world arena each day, stocks, bonds, and all, that's being run by these same people who took many of their so-called people into a car, knew it was going to crash, and bet against them. And now I listen to people say, well, I'm trading the market, or I'm in there, and I'm saying, do you realize what you're up against? Do you understand how tilted the playing field is in the arena? And yet today, most people are going about their investments basically the same way they did 5 years ago.
Yeah, that is distressing, because if you don't learn from history, you're condemned to repeat it. And that brings up the derivative boondoggle, which is just going up and up and up. My personal belief is that shortly before the system's about to implode, all of those derivatives will be repudiated, disavowed. And my belief in that is because of what happened in Greece, where they said to the banks, you're going to take a 50% haircut, but this is voluntary. It's not a default, so you don't get paid off on the credit default swaps. So these credit default swaps, it's like buying insurance from a company down the street that's a total scam, and they closed up, and you still think your policy is going to get paid off, but it's not.
Well, that's a very good description of it. And like I said, that is just one of the issues that was part of the credit crisis in 2008, has not gone away and has only gotten worse. And so you're correct. And so when we take all of that, knowing the people who are the major players is, in a sense, betting against the public interest, we have a regulatory commission that, wherever it may be, who's ever in charge. I mean, look what happened in MF Global. I mean, what I don't think people understand about the MF Global, and I know they don't because I talk to the average person in my generalities of going around in day-to-day life, and that is they don't understand that if that group could take money that they should never be, that's supposed to be segregated, and use it for their own advantage, what is stopping or preventing that happening tomorrow at your brokerage firm or, your bank or wherever it may be?
Nothing.
The severity that should have happened and would have happened still in some other countries where they would have, in a sense, almost grabbed our former governor who was running MF Global, and I don't want to say hang him, but put him immediately into a trial or what have you, and co-watch and ask where things are and won't release them until they say where it is. That's the other concern of the financial system that isn't getting any attention. Me personally, several years ago, and I told my readers today in my post, I continue to have the largest bulk of my cash monies out of dollars. I'm actually in Canadian dollars. I believe Canada is one of only two countries in the Western world that I feel can weather even these dark days that are coming. Canada and Germany, I think, are countries that can weather what's coming. I don't believe in the U.S. dollar, despite the so-called, what I've been getting emails because I called it terminally ill for a few years. People think it's had a miracle healing. I just think the only thing that's happened is because the euro's been so focused on there's been some weakness in it, and of course, if it's weak, then the dollar rebounds. I don't think there's a movement worldwide to get ingrained into U.S. financial assets, particularly the dollar. And when that turns, and when people finally realize that our problem is far worse than Europe ever had, then the dollar is really going to get torn apart. And I certainly don't want to be in U.S. denominated assets, and particularly cash. I think Canada is probably, in my mind, one of the safest places to be because they could be self-sufficient. They are certainly energy self-sufficient. I believe food-wise they can be, and their financial federal system on a national level is in much better shape than ours. They did not participate in any big way in the mistakes that were made 5 and 10 years ago by lots of governments and banks in the Western world. So, people say to me, where do you seek safety? Well, I start with gold, of course, but when it comes to a nation, I look north. I have a lot of confidence being involved in Canada. I just wish they had warmer days in the winter. I lived there.
Yeah, that is a problem. I mean, I'm off to the Vancouver resource show.
Yes, so am I, yes.
Oh, okay. So we'll definitely connect there. And I'm saying, okay, so it's the end of January, and we're going where?
Well, the interesting about Vancouver, although they're actually getting snow this week, which is quite unusual for them, they have more like a Seattle weather. But if you just go 30 miles, 40 miles outside of Vancouver this time of year, obviously, especially up to Whistler, you'll see a lot of snow. But getting past the snow end, one of the mistakes America again is making, and maybe this is the window, I know maybe you want to speak about energy, is the United States here fighting this pipeline and not opening and securing our future, and instead really forcing Canada to look elsewhere, primarily to Asia and China in particular, is just another major economic, political, and social mistake that the United States is making worldwide.
Yeah, it's pure stupidity, and it makes me almost feel like we will get what we deserve. I wrote a little thing, and I do this thing called the Triple Lutz Report on CarrieLutz.com, and number one was casinos don't create wealth, and number two was Governor Cuomo is more interested in creating croupiers than oil drillers because they want a casino in, where Aqueduct is,
right?
But they won't allow gas drilling, which in Pennsylvania next door is a multi-billion-dollar industry, has created so much wealth and continues to do so. Yeah, there's problems with it, like any growth industry. But why wouldn't you want natural gas when all you complain about is trying to shut down Indian Point? Well, natural gas, if you can produce it in enough quantities, build power plants, you could do that. Now, I'm not endorsing closing Indian Point, but if that's what you're really concerned about, how could you not be pro-natural gas? It's that kind of policy stupidity and crony capitalism that's really driving this whole country and the world down the tubes.
And that brings us to another point, because one of the flashpoints, and it might have taken longer than even I first thought, but it too is a question of when, not if, is the growing potential conflicts in the Middle East. I don't think the Americans, and certainly in the investment community, has understood what has been unfolding there, not only in the countries surrounding Israel, but Israel versus Iran, or Iran versus Israel, however you want to look at it. And I don't think they understand exactly what we're moving to, how the pieces are setting up to one or more very serious conflicts. And then, of course, we'll have a tremendous energy spike, and then there'll be calls that we should do this, that, and the other. And what's really silly is, especially with what has been, I still believe they are good neighbors, although it looks like Washington doesn't think that sometimes, our good neighbors to the north, how together through natural gas we could basically in the next generation become self-sufficient. And no disrespect to Israel and all, but I don't think we would have as much concern about what was happening in the Middle East, where mostly things produced outside of oil is sand. We don't need a lot of sand that I know of. We wouldn't have the concerns and literally the hundreds of billions of dollars over decades that we have spent because of that. So, again, our energy policy is yet again another bad situation, only getting worse. And, I've talked today, I said, and I continue to say to my readers that I think $100 is coming more of the bottom of the range than the top of the range. And it will not surprise me this time of year to see $125 or $150 oil, even if we don't get the ultimate conflict this year, which I think eventually comes, but even if it doesn't materialize to that level. And that's, again, and part of that is because we have not had for quite a while, not just this administration, but several, any real good energy policy and finally grasp and understand what really needs to be done in the U.S. to become self-sufficient. And for Canadians, thank God, they have that, and they can count on that, and with their vast lands and rather small population, can be self-sufficient food-wise as well. So, if everybody says get a cabin in West Virginia, I say no. If you're going to get a cabin, get it somewhere north of the border. Yeah,
I could see, if everything really hits the fan, Canada could definitely be a place where you want to be, and when they start restricting us from going in there, we'll know that it's too late, basically. But
right.
Yeah, like the whole natural gas thing, we have so much of it, and Canada has so much. We could be energy self-sufficient in 5 years just by adding converters to cars. I was in Vegas, and the casino sent a limo to pick me up because I was with a high roller. And I get to the car, and it says, this vehicle runs on compressed natural gas. And I was talking to the guy. He said, yeah, it's a little bit slower, but I don't have to go fill it up that often, and it's quick to fill up, and it runs cleaner, quieter. It's a lot better. And we got tons of this stuff. We have shut-in wells, shell gas wells all over the place, and nobody can put two and two together. They think electric cars is the future, and it might be, but it's not the immediate future. It's not the intermediate future. It's the long-term future.
I concur. Again, it's not an area I specialize in, but I do know that we have many things wrong. One of it is the energy, and at the end of the day, energy and food, although the CPI doesn't seem to think it's important because they give us inflation numbers not counting inflation, food and energy, but our energy policy is in real bad shape in the U.S.
Yeah, well, it's been running on autopilot, and the autopilot is like from that movie Airplane with Leslie Nielsen. It's some inflatable thing that just takes off on its own, and that's the whole government, I'm afraid. It's like Airplane. So on that note, just tell us where we find you again and what you produce.
Great. It's Grandich.com, Grandich.com. My work there is mainly I work with junior resource companies and corporate development, and then I also spend a great deal of time talking about the markets. It's free. You don't have to sign up for anything. There is an opportunity to get an email alert, which simply is late at night. The last 5 posts that were made on the blog will be sent to you, and there's no other information that's required, and of course it's free.
I'm on the newsletter list. It's a great letter. It's really informative. We appreciate your coming on the Financial Survival Network. We'll be trying to stay in touch with you to keep up with the rapidly changing and escalating course of events.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.